The verdict for Elizabeth Holmes, the tech entrepreneur who was once a billionaire, is now a convicted criminal, facing years of prison time. Found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors in her blood testing company, Theranos. Our chief business correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, has been tracking this story from the start. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, George. And this is a story they will study in law schools and business schools for years to come. It will be in the history books. Elizabeth Holmes, who famously dropped out of college to revolutionize blood testing, once compared to Steve Jobs, now found guilty of 4 counts of criminal fraud.
Do you have anything you want to say?
Overnight, Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes walking out of court a convicted felon after being found guilty of knowingly misleading investors about her company's blood testing technology. Holmes, once the world's youngest self-made female billionaire,
we've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood.
Found guilty on 4 of 11 counts of criminal fraud. The jury, 8 men and 4 women, who spent 7 days deliberating, also found Holmes not guilty on 4 charges concerning defrauding patients. On 3 additional counts, there was no verdict as the jury remained deadlocked.
I think that it reflects a very conscientious group of men and women that were deciding Ms. Holmes' fate in this case.
Over the course of 15 weeks, jurors heard the testimony of 32 witnesses, including former Theranos board member General James Mattis, employees, patients, and even Holmes herself, who spent 7 days on the witness stand denying allegations she intentionally deceived anyone about the effectiveness of Theranos' blood testing technology. When asked if investors had lost money because she'd misled them, Holmes replied, "Of course not." But during a previous sworn deposition, Holmes admitted that a number of her prior claims were not always accurate.
I know that we made so many mistakes.
Holmes, now 37, raised almost $1 billion from the likes of media titan Rupert Murdoch, the family of former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, and the Waltons, heirs to the Walmart fortune. She now faces up to 20 years in prison and will be sentenced by the judge at a later date.
And the government will have an option to decide if it wants to retry Holmes on those 3 counts where the jury could not reach a verdict. She faces up to 20 years for each of those guilty counts in prison. And every legal expert I spoke to, Robin, says she will almost certainly spend years behind bars when she's sentenced.
And
Robin?
Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to talk to another legal expert, our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. So what, first of all, Dan, do you make of the mixed verdict?
Well, look, I think that this jury clearly deliberated very carefully here over 7 days. And the verdict kind of makes sense in the sense that they're saying, we believe she defrauded investors. We weren't convinced that she defrauded patients. But look, in the end here, this is a win for prosecutors. You can say, oh, well, you know, there were 4 counts she wasn't convicted on, and there were these 3 counts where they were hung. But in the end, there were 4 guilty verdicts here, which I think is clearly a loss for Elizabeth Holmes and something that the prosecutors are probably quite pleased about.
And so how much time could she possibly be facing behind bars?
Look, there's a wide range here. There are these federal sentencing guidelines out there, but they're just guidelines, right? At this point, they're not mandatory. So you're going to see each side make arguments. The defense is going to say she should serve no time. The prosecutors are going to say significant time. You're talking about up to 20 years on each count as the possibility. I don't think anyone thinks she's going to serve 20 years. I think that the more reasonable range is somewhere in the 3 to 10-year range, for example. But remember, in the sentencing phase of this, she can now make arguments that may not have been persuasive to the jury. She says she was abused, for example. That's something where she could say to the judge, or lawyers could say, that should be taken into consideration when deciding how much time she should serve behind bars.
And Dan, you mentioned the 3 counts where the jury could not reach a verdict. So, retrial?
I'd be very surprised if prosecutors retried her on those 3 counts. They could. Remember, there's a hung jury. Prosecutors are allowed to retry the case. But that means effectively retrying this entire case for 3 counts, which even if she was convicted of in the next trial, would probably be served at the same time as whatever sentence she's going to get in connection with the other 4 she was convicted of. So I can't imagine that prosecutors are going to spend the time and effort to prosecute her again on those 3 charges, but technically they're allowed to.
All right, good points as always. Dan, thank you. Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.